Okay, so here we are in a Blender 5.0 scene. This is the 3D model that I created for this Sotsu monitor. This is actually a product that I'll talk about later in the video that I've been using. And I reached out to them. We got to do a little partnership with them, so that's been really cool. But as far as this model goes, I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining in detail how I modeled this. I'll actually put a screen recording on the screen now of me in SolidWorks. With my mechanical engineering background, I actually just went ahead and modeled this with CAD. The reason I did that is that, a lot of these bevels, when you try to do polygon modeling, one thing that is really difficult is using good bevels and getting good topology. And so I actually have a workflow now that I've been modeling it. If it's a CAD type product that has, very defined radius, corners, and I know the dimensions of, it's a lot easier for me to just jump into CAD and do it. If you are interested in knowing how to model stuff like this, I do have a series where I've modeled some keyboards and some other stuff that use a lot of these principles. So if you do want to know how to create a model like this, definitely go check out those videos. But as far as this video goes, for this model, I actually jumped into CAD. I took a bunch of measurements from the actual monitor that they sent me out. And so I just took the measurements of everything. I actually 3D printed a little radius guide for these corners because I didn't have a good way to measure what those were. And then all I did after I modeled everything individually was in SolidWorks, I created assembly just to make sure everything fit. And then the only other thing that I added, I'll go to material preview mode here in Blender. I found their link for their logo, and I just brought that in as an image display and I parented it. And then I did create this fun little animation. I actually think this is cool just because it shows you how this monitor folds up, which is not something that I showed necessarily in the other thing. I've been traveling with this. I may even put some pictures onto the screen of some trips I've gotten to take, getting to do some work. And one thing that I love about this monitor is I throw it in my backpack and then I basically have two sets of screen. I'll show some videos of me using it later, but it folds up super thin like this. And then all I did for this was just kind of mess with animating, setting that up. This is ultimately the way that I ended up making the animation at the beginning of this video, was just more highlighting, the monitor overall. But it is really neat. It's super, super thin. I actually just love this product just because of the way that it folds up super thin. It throws in my backpack. Compared to my laptop, my new laptop, which I bought this year for being able to work and travel, it's so thin and so light. It's been really, really cool. So yeah, this is the 3D model. There's not too much to go over here. Like I said, if you are interested in learning how to make a model like this, feel free to go check out like some of my other videos. But we're going to move on from the actual model to the texturing. Okay, so for the texturing of this model, it's a very simple set of textures. The actual screen itself, I'm just going to pan around over here. I have a artwork that I got from Envato Elements. I've been using them pretty frequently in some of my projects, so I just found this really cool texture that was kind of similar to what Sotsu had on their website. And then as far as the textures for this go, this texture, I've really seen in a lot of different products that this type of anodized metal is really hard to light. There's just, if you have a really broad flat light, it ends up just looking completely flat and you don't lose, or you don't get a lot of detail. So I actually, if you've watched the channel and you've seen stuff, I use Grayscale Gorilla's assets pretty heavily. They have a lot of great product viz type materials. I actually have this whole big complicated node group that I tried to make up here. And then what I basically ended up on is just as the anodized space gray material from Grayscale Gorilla. So if you look here, I'm basically just using a metallic map, a normal map, and then a roughness map. But then in similar videos, if I have made an anodized space material, or an anodized, not space, an anodized metal material pretty easily. So I just want to show you, if you don't have access to Grayscale Gorilla, first of all, there's places like Ambient CG and other places that you can get free textures. But if you don't have that, you can make a pretty close replica of this. If you just duplicate, this piece, and if I bring this over here, this is going to get rid of all that detail. But then all it really takes is a noise texture, which I do Control-Shift-Click to preview this. And then I'm also going to do Control-T, and I just want to be the object coordinates instead of the generated. And then what I'd probably do is just scale this up until you get a very, very fine texture. So I'm going to think probably like 1500, maybe even more, 3000. It needs to be really small. You can play with this roughness. I usually leave this pretty high. And then I would say we need even more than that. So 8,000. You just need a really, really fine detail here. And then very easily you could drag out to this into a couple of color ramps, just like this. I'm going to have one for the metallic, one for the roughness, and then one for the normal. So let's just do Control-Shift-D, and that will duplicate it with its connection. And then for this one, I would just drop it into a bump height node and then put that in the normal. And then if you plug one into your roughness, one into your metallic here, and then you could do this. Obviously that goes completely crazy, but let's set this to like 0.1, and then here, now we're just going to play with some of these values. Obviously your metallic is going to be a big thing. You don't want there to be mostly white, or you want it to be mostly metallic. So we're just going to bring that basically all the way up. So this metallic is, basically a value of 1 all the way across. And then I would probably bring that up even further, like 0.99. And then, yeah, then it's just a matter of really going through and fine tweaking like the rest of these values. But this is a really great start to getting a anodized material just like that. So you can see that basically looks really similar. And honestly, depending on the variation you get, you could then take, if this is the base color I was using, which is a really, really dark color, it's basically 0, which in all reality, like you should probably have this turned up a little bit more and then, adjust some of these values and bring that color back down that way. But this is a good setup for an anodized type of material. And then it really just comes down to your lighting. So I'm going to set that back to something like 0.05 or something just to get, let's go lower, 0.02. Yeah, that was good. So if you're not using a set of PBR textures that provide the perfect materials, just use reference images, but then it really can get this kind of nice anodized material with a simple noise texture. And then obviously if you wanted to, you could duplicate this one and you could change the scale back down to like, I don't know, maybe 1,000. And then if you previewed this, you could get some variation across. Let's even go lower. Let's go like 200. You could do that, and then you could even multiply that into your base color and get like some nice variation across those different pieces. But for now, I'm just going to put this back here. So yeah, this is the PBR texture that I used. I'm using basically a triplanar projection, which if you don't know how to do that, a very easy way to do that is for your object, you basically set it to point, you give a triplanar scale, and then basically it's projecting the texture from multiple angles so that you don't have to worry about UV unwrapping. So yeah, that's basically the texturing for this. There isn't too much else going on here. It was very easy in the front of this. I'm just going to grab this guy and flip him around real quick. I did keyframe this. It looks dark now because I didn't want this showing on the background so the screen looks dark. But all I really have here is I think I have a glass plane, basically being the screen, and it's got a, if I click into this, let's just solo this and tab in edit mode. I basically just made a rectangle from this, or I took the outer layer of this line and then I inset it so that I got the, the curved radius. And then this has a material, it's just like a black glass and edge material. And then this is just like a glass and edge. I think I'm doing it with let me see here. Yeah, I'm just using a mask that I made. I basically just put a square, because I didn't want to use this curved edge. The monitor actually has a flat, like a rectangle here. So I just used a black and white mask that I UV projected onto this, and then I'm using that to go either between a glass here and then also just this black shader here. So yeah, that's basically the glass panel, and then I think underneath that, if I hide this, I just have this plane in here inside of this, which is just the screen, and it looks crazy when you take the glass off, because I also have some light linking and stuff going on here. So yeah, nothing too difficult in the texturing phase as far as the the actual textures for this go. This is all a basically a unified material, the base, everything. And then I just brought in this image as plain, and I used the transparency in the alpha to where it cuts it out. So yeah, that's basically the texturing. And so for this animation now, I'm going to kind of focus on the lighting and then the rendering and animation. Before we take a look at the lighting, I did want to talk about this Sotsu monitor that they sent me really quickly. This video isn't sponsored, but I have been using this just within the last several months as a part of this collaboration for this video. I love the way that it folds up super small in my backpack when I've been traveling for work. It's been awesome to not just to have to work off of one laptop screen. I basically get to double that when I'm just out and about. So this has just been a really cool part of my workflow. I now use it as part of my desk setup. If you are interested, there is a link in this video. You can go buy it. Again, the video is not sponsored, but I will get an affiliate link bonus from that. So yeah, if you're interested in picking one of these up, feel free to check them out. And with that, let's get back to the video. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the lighting and the actual animation that we did for this thing, and then we'll probably do a chapter at the end on some post-processing and some sound design, which is something that I've been trying to put into more videos. One thing that I leaned really heavily into for this animation, just because of the nature of this material, was a lot of light linking. So this scene I did not do as good of a job of naming them, but you'll see if you go into these light linking areas or the light linking section of a lot of these lights, I have them doing very specific things. This one right here, I have excluded from a couple pieces, which again, this was a very short project and I didn't have enough time to really name everything the way that I would like to. But this was something that I did pretty heavily in this project. Was I wanted, for example, if I look at this light, let's see, let's pick one that has some good light linking. if I turn this off, it's basically showing on multiple different pieces. And I think it also kind of depends on the angle that I was going. But yeah, for this area, one thing that I always do for my lighting is if I bring in a light, I have this image texture. So let me go to image editor, and then let's look at GSG, this here. So yeah, this is just an area light map that for each of these area lights in the scene, instead of it just being a solid white, emission, I basically am using a really high data image, an EXR image, to influence where the softbox would be lighter or darker. This does a couple things. Well, it gives you nicer reflections, especially on reflective objects. Having this here just provides a ton of detail, as opposed to just getting like a harsh white line. And then another thing that I might do is like set this light to be a disc, and I could even feather the edges. So yeah, for each of the lights in this scene, I have a softbox texture on it so that it will basically provide more realistic detail. And then it's just a matter of kind of placing them in the scene in an area that makes sense. I want it to have a nice dark edge. I start off kind of with a, out of focus. I keyframed the focus object here. So if you go back, like we're looking at this corner, but the focus is back here, and then it kind of pulls focus to here, kind of highlight that nice sharp edge that you're getting. I also wanted there to be nice composition here, so I kind of have this like nice shape. One thing that I kind of wish that I did, honestly, was if you look at this, I kind of wished instead of coming off of the top, if I changed the Z location of this camera empty, which I guess I should mention. For each of these shots, I want to be able to move the camera and pivot around a certain point. So for that, when I start basically any project that I have to do something like this, I will basically keyframe, or excuse me, not keyframe. I will go ahead and make an empty object, and then I will parent the camera to that. And so then that means if I want to like get a super good focus on this corner, I can keyframe and maneuver this empty controller, and I can like then rotate my camera. If I go to individual origin for this thing, I can rotate around this point, which then gives you a lot of control into that. But one thing I was mentioning earlier was I kind of wish that I had brought this up a little bit higher. I think originally I did this in a vertical format, and then I swapped it to horizontal for YouTube. So, I kind of wish that just for the composition, that would maybe have like come across closer to this diagonal line, or just stayed out of there. So yeah, as far as the lighting goes, I'm not using any HDRI in this scene. The one that I have preloaded in there has a really strong kind of directional light. So I actually might have already moved it. Let's go to the shader editor, go to the world. Yeah, by default, it has this really bright light on this side. And the way that I just had it set up, I didn't want it to affect it. So I wasn't using any HDRI in this scene. I'm only using the backlights, or the actual lights in the scene. I'm gonna go back to this image editor, just highlight that because this is super important. And then yeah, the other thing that I did was for this background, I just have a light that's basically shining onto the background. If I hide this, you can see the background goes dark. That just kind of gives you this nice gradient fall off here. And then I really wanted there to be a bright background to kind of highlight against the black of this texture that I created. So the other thing that I did was for the animation, I didn't want the background to really change. So I went to my starting frame. I got, I went to like here, and I had parented the object, this basically, if I do Alt-R, this is kind of what I had to begin with, and you can tell the lighting and the dimension really changes the image. Right now it just looks like a rectangle. But I basically at the very beginning parented that light in this background to this point because I knew I wasn't going to see a shadow or anything here, and I really wanted that background to just be stuck on its point. So yeah, as the camera animates, that's kind of how that goes. And then honestly, it really just comes down to I ended up only having 4 lights in the scene. So nothing too crazy. I would say that, some of my scenes can get more complex depending on how it goes. But for this scene, I really just kind of have this top light here. Let's just kind of go through them and see what each of them is doing. This right here is a fill light on my left-hand side. You can see I put it lower because I wanted it to be a stronger light at the bottom and kind of gradiate up to the top. So that's one kind of intentional choice to make with this light is, let's just turn the rest of these back on. If you do this, this is just basically black, and I was losing, there was no detail in this area whatsoever. So throwing this back in, you can see you pop some of that texture back in, and then you also get this nice gradient up to this darkest point, which is kind of this curve, and I really wanted that to kind of be the focal point. It kind of also highlights this like super nice tight bevel that the product has, and you can see this nice texture in here, and you zoom in. So yeah, that is kind of how this light was set. So this is kind of a left fill light. This is the backlight here, And then on the, let's see here, this one is kind of your front light. I honestly kind of like it without this, or maybe I could have even turned this, this side fill light down a little bit. But yeah, the choices that I made were basically just, instead of placing lights to illuminate stuff, you basically want to show shape and contrast and detail. And so one thing that you can do when you're setting your lights is, intentionally choose to reveal something as opposed to just getting rid of, you're not trying to add lights, you're trying to show shadow essentially. Because if you just add lights everywhere, everything ends up feeling washed out. So yeah, a tip for setting up your lighting is to try to create dynamic, contrast in your shadows and your brightness. So yeah, that's kind of the lighting for this scene. Let's check out the second shot. Very similar as far as the animation goes. I just wanted to show that this has like this little knob control button, and I love the design of like this. It's like very minimal the way they designed this back piece. So I kind of wanted to highlight that. One thing I will say is for a storyboard for this, I didn't have a ton of time, but I knew that a couple things that I wanted to focus on. I wanted to show that it was a monitor. I wanted to show that it was really thin. I wanted to highlight the design. I wanted to show this button. So I kind of just worked in a way that made sense. I wanted to show this, like, the third shot that you saw at the beginning of the scene, where it kind of clicks into its stand. So I basically just thought of things that I could do. If I started here, I could come across, I would get to this point, then I could come down. That's kind of how the flow for this animation came across. So yeah, for this animation, all I did was I had camera movement coming from left to right. So I just kind of picked that up. I centered out on the point to where it is in the very center of the frame. And then for this little button here, I think I just rotated it kind of back and in with some keyframes to give you a nice little button depress, and then just started going straight down. And then for this one, let's take a look at the lighting. I think it's basically the same lighting. Let's just kind of go through each of these lights again to see what they do. This is the background light here, and then this light here on the right-hand side is basically just giving you some fill light. It's actually not doing too much, but it is kind of helping you have a darker corner down here. You can see how it's brighter in this area than down. This one right here, let's see what that is. This third light, can't even find it. Where is this light? Oh, that's the background light, or another background light. I guess I had two kind of were on the background. This is the top light. This is the right-hand fill light. This is why you should name your scenes. This is the kind of backlight. And then this one is basically, let's go down here and see. Yeah, this is getting that bottom rim light, which I think only really even appears at the bottom. The one thing that I will say is I just needed to make sure that I had like this bright background. I had this light coming down because I wanted to get this nice ridge line here. So yeah, basically I'm just trying to highlight. And one thing that I will say is I kind of wish that I either didn't make this as bright, or I did something to where you could kind of get, this just looks like a flat line here. I do wish maybe even I could have rotated this just slightly, just enough to get you some type of detail there. It could be the very slightest amount. That would have maybe helped you kind of get the dimension of this, but I didn't do that when I did the animation. So yeah, just very simple again, 4 lights. I do think I have some light linking going on as far as like, and they probably were carried over from older ones, but I didn't want there to be too much light on any specific piece. And then yeah, we go down to here, we go to shot 3. Shot 4 is going to be the one that the lighting really goes crazy on. I'm using the same 4 lights essentially. I just, kind of pivoted and rotated them until I got down to this point. For this shot, this camera I think has a pretty long focal length, 250, because I didn't want there to be a lot of vertical distortion. I really wanted to highlight the brand name at some point, and then just the design of this piece sliding in was really cool. So yeah, it's very simple keyframes. I mean, just grabbing this piece, which I have this piece parented to this, and then, with a couple Z keyframes, I'll go to the editor here. Yeah, I just added these nice curves. Instead of using the default ones, just kind of tried to make a nice little motion there. And then that let me do this kind of pan, rotate thing, and then that's going to then take me into the next one. Same lights, but the last one is the one that we'll definitely spend a little bit more time on the lighting. You can see how many lights I have here. And it's a lot. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, we have a lot of lights. Obviously, we have one up at the top that's basically, let's just kind of go through them all. I had one on the floor. I wanted there to be a brightness level there. And again, it's so interesting going back and looking. I kind of wish that I had made this a little bit darker, maybe more like 4, to really kind of keep your eye focused up here, but I'll just set this back to what it was. This is basically a floor light highlighting that front area. This light here, let's go to it. This is a right-hand fill light. So if I hide it, let's just zoom in a little bit. It's basically just adding a little bit of light in this area. It's very minimal. And then this light is the background light. This light here looks like it basically was just on the corner. And one thing I will say is, it was kind of dependent on some of these other angles. Like on some of these, I wanted there to be a highlight rim here. So that's what some of these are doing. And then again, for a lot of these, I do have light linking set up. I think this plane 1 and 4 is the screen. Let me see where this is at. And honestly, because I copied over, I'm not even entirely sure that the light linking is there on all of them, but there was several like on these lights. I have this light here, which was basically, I think if I hide this, let me go to it. There is a point at this very beginning right here, and it's kind of hard to see in the rendered view, but there is a light right here. And I'm not sure which one it is. Let's see here. Go through them all. Yeah, it's this one. So I have this one labeled as the screen. Basically, this one only affects the glass. I didn't want it to be anything else, but when I pivoted this screen up, I needed to show that this was reflective. And because this is kind of a studio environment, it's kind of hard to sell that sometimes. So what I basically did was add in a light kind of where the light would be for this. And then I think a lot of the other lights here are told not to affect the glass, because that way I kind of, have the display be maintained the way that I wanted. And so when I did that, that basically let me, put in this nice little highlight to where when the screen tilts, you go, okay, yeah, that's reflective because it's, reflecting the light there. So yeah, then basically the rest of these are just kind of rim lights and focusing on different areas. The one thing that I really wanted there to be that was well lit at the end was this back. If you look at this, you've got a darker corner in this bottom, but then it's also brighter here and it kind of has this nice fall off. That just helps this product to not feel like a black, piece of paper, like a TV screen or something that's flat. So the way I did that was I have a light here, which is kind of the main key light, and it's offset a little bit to an angle. It's also using that, if I go to the object here in the shader editor, it's using that same EXR. That just gives some nice detail to the light. And then for some of them, I adjusted the spread. Obviously, I adjusted the spread on this one that's on the ground. This one has right here on the back. This is kind of just another one of those lights that's pointed directly at the background. Then I've got a spread value on it, which is a pretty good trick to making a kind of a nice gradiated background. And then from there, I also did just a couple things with the, let's see, looks like basically the rest of them. This one I adjusted to be a disc so that I got on the screen area, I got that nice kind of curved thing instead of it being perfectly flat. So yeah, that was basically the lighting. The only other thing that I did was I have this like call out, this text thing. I will try to find the call out link. Hopefully I'll put it in the description of the video, but I bought some call out things that basically it's a drag and drop geometry node system. And it comes with a bunch of preset animations and you just put the text in that you want. I just wanted to highlight some of the little features about the product. So yeah, that's basically all the lighting. The animation is nothing too difficult. It's very simple keyframes. I'm just basically moving around single axes, and then a lot of work was spent in the graph editor, making sure that all the different components have, good animation curves and all that stuff. And then as far as rendering goes, for most of these, when I rendered out for YouTube, I just rendered out in HD. I set the noise threshold to 0.03, which I've found to be a pretty good balance between, 0.1 will start clipping your noise in detail a little bit early, but if you set it all the way to 0.01, a lot of times it can be too much. I've been using 0.3 pretty frequently. And then for my final render, I've been using the open image denoise for the denoiser instead of optics. I just found that it's been more detailed, and I'll make sure to always use the GPU for that. And then I usually will crank this up to somewhere around 500. But for that, I will typically render out a frame and just see the amount of time that it takes. And then one trick that I will do is after this renders one frame, change the slot to number 2. You can do that by pressing the number 2 at the top of your keyboard. And then I would probably just set this to like, I don't know, let's just do a little bit less. Let's do 400 and then re-render that frame. And then it's going to be a little bit difficult probably with YouTube compression. But when you do that, it would be a good idea to, basically look at these and then toggle between them with 1 and 2 on your numpad. You can see up here that 1 and 2 is changing when I do that. And then when I zoom in to like the details of this image, again, it probably wouldn't matter at HD, but especially if you're going for like a 4K render, just look and see if there's a lot of variation. If you're losing detail in your texture, you can see this is basically getting washed out. Like I'm not getting any of that texture in this because of rendering at a lower sample rate. you're kind of backed out far away. So it kind of depends on the context of the shot. But this is a good trick to make sure you, like, I shaved off, these were relatively quick because they're HD, but 10 to 15% of the time, well, yeah, 10 to 15% ish. And, obviously if it was a bigger scene, it would save more time. So yeah, definitely check those there. And then the last thing that I want to do is I'm going to jump to another Blender file and just show you a couple of compositor tricks that I did for the YouTube thumbnail for this. So let's go look at that other Blender file. Okay, this is the file that I just basically duplicated from that old one when I was making the thumbnail for this YouTube video. I wanted there to be the word Blender on here, and I also just wanted there to be more of a dark, moody kind of product image to be the thumbnail. I just wanted to go over a couple of compositor things that I did. If you haven't been using the compositor in Blender 5.0, it's just really, really good. There's a couple of really neat things in here. If you do a color correct node, this is really neat, but then there's also a tune image. Let me see if I can find this one. This is a crazy node. Like, this is such a good thing. If you plug this in here, you can mess with the contrast natively, and it has this really nice feel, as opposed to like trying to do it with, maybe your color management down here. So you could definitely try that. This color boost is a really nice feature. You can see how much that adds just like going back and forth. And I have seen some really awesome results. You could also do this clarity, which like basically tries to preserve detail. Same thing for your detail slider. I didn't end up using this one, but I did use the glare. I basically brought in the Blender logo and I made it in a emissive texture, and then I kind of wanted it to feel integrated in scene, so I added a glare node to that. So if you just kind of turn it on and off, you basically get this kind of baked into your image. You could do that in like a either Photoshop or Affinity or something. And then the only other thing that I did was I loved some renders that I've been doing with a little bit of noise added in later. This sensor noise here, I'm going to go ahead and just render a frame just to where you can kind of see the difference. I rendered this out at 4K, so it may take me just another second. But this is an animated, it has an option to be animated, but it's a super good noise, sensor noise emulator to go ahead and put into your render if you don't want it to feel perfectly flat. One thing that this really does help with is if you go to post a image with a gradiated color like this, especially depending on what compression you go with, this noise built into your image can really help, with the compression not being blocky or basically going to being too square, or a lot of banding will happen sometimes. So I'm going to go to this render here. And then if you look at we can swap to the view layer, you can basically see, like, even on my screen, there's gradiated banding across here. I'm sure in YouTube there's going to be as well. Whereas if I put it back into the composite with a little bit of grain, it really helps break up some of that. And I knew that I wanted a gradiated background for this render. It also just kind of helps add to this anodized texture here. So yeah, that's kind of how I made the thumbnail. The last little thing that I'm going to go over for this video is just briefly touch on some editing stuff that I did in DaVinci. And then after we do that, we will call it a wrap for this video. So let's jump over to DaVinci. Okay, so here we are in DaVinci. This is just the timeline of the animation that I made at the very beginning, and then I'm going to be dropping all this footage in here later. So future me is going to put in the camera and what we're talking about now. But basically, I just wanted to go through a couple things for this setup here. I am not a good sound designer. I've been wanting to work with more sound designers, and just with scheduling, and a lot of times they're very busy, and I'll do stuff kind of on a late schedule. So I'm hoping to do some work with some people that can actually give some of the animations a lot better feel. But just for YouTube, I wanted to throw a quick edit in here, and I did want to show kind of how I do that. So I'm going to drag this other application up here. This is Soundly. If you haven't used Soundly, it is a freemium software that you can go download, and then you get access to a bunch of free sound effects. There are a bunch of effects that are not for free. You have to go, subscribe to their thing. It's $20 a month, looks like. But I get a lot of free sounds out of here, and it's really neat. You can search for example, for this animation, there's a bunch of like swoosh effects that I wanted to add. So, oh, I lost my screen. Let me go back, Soundly. And then I would just go up here, I would type swoosh. And then this is something that I got from Polyfjord, by the way. So shout out to Mr. Polyfjord over in Oslo. No, wait, where's he in? Norway? One of the best. So if I find a sound that I like, which I don't know if you'll be able to get the sound, I don't know if I have system audio, but if I grab this section that I really like, I can just bring it directly into my timeline, and then I usually have to turn them down a little bit, as a background. But that's where I got the sound from. I also downloaded this sound, or this music, from, I think it was Pixabay Sound. So it's a royalty-free music website. It's got music and sound and images and stuff. So yeah, that's where I did that. And then I basically just went through each of these, and then on the areas where I was kind of moving between, I added some swooshes. I added some like little click noise here by just going to Soundly and just searching for click until I found some like little knob pressy sounds that would press here. I left them pretty low to where you don't really notice too much. And then yeah, I added this background rumbly kind of sound to be a low bassier sound and give it a little bit of texture throughout the animation. And then at the end, just some more whooshes. And then this I made in Affinity, which is just their logo and my logo at the end. I just thought it looked cool. Yeah, and then that was basically the whole edit for this. The only other thing that I did for some of these was, I don't think I did it on any of them specifically, but something that I do typically like to do is I have the paid version of DaVinci. I love the grain effects. So if you go to effects, let's see, it should be here, search grain. I will usually throw some film grain on there. And then you can obviously adjust over here. You can turn up the grain strength. That is like super crazy. So then I would just like bring this down. And then I would play with this texture. I usually like it to be really small and then turn that grain strength down to where you're not really seeing it. And that can just kind of help again with some of that banding. You can see it on here. When I rendered this, I didn't use any noise grain. You can see how bad this is. I'll probably actually re-render this before we make it to the final edit. So yeah, this is basically how I did the final edit. I didn't do anything super special there. So yeah, this is basically the end of the tutorial. I hope you got something out of it. I may play this animation again at the end. I'm excited to keep posting some more. I have a better content schedule now coming up for this year. January was really crazy, but February should be getting pretty well rocked on there. So I hope you got something out of this video. And with that, we'll see you in the next one.